Mm, I think what we need to do is lay very strong foundations so that our institutional capacity to deal with maritime disputes in general will be stronger at the end of the Duterte administration, so that, for instance, whoever is the next president will be, whatever their own preferences or style or approach towards China will be, we will at least have a stronger, for instance, a stronger navy and a stronger coast guard, law and clearer law enforcement, mandate. Our diplomacy should be stronger as well, meaning better relations with like ASEAN countries, who should have been more forthcoming in their support for us in the first place, but were not. So meaning we did have weaknesses on that score. Stronger relations with other partners like Japan, Australia, but the critical thing also is more mutual respect between Philippines and China itself. I would say that at the end of the Aquino administration, there was very little prospect of mutual respect between these two countries, because we were very hostile and antagonistic, in fact. So if the third, and that was not, and that kind of extreme position, I suppose, paved the way for the 180-degree turn. If we had had a more stable, firm, but stable, balanced position at the end of the previous government, then there could have been more options for this current government. So hopefully at the end of 5 years, even if we have not resolved all the issues, the processes are in place. We have greater consensus among our own internal stakeholders on what to do with China, what to do with the West Philippine Sea, what about ASEAN, is there a role for US and other players. So that should at least be much clearer to us. But certainly there are some urgent concerns. One is oil exploration. I mean, we have energy is a key question, and I think the sooner the Philippines can persuade China that our energy needs are an important security concern for us, then the better. So I think that can't wait beyond the 5 years. And codes of conduct, rules at sea. How do we behave when our navies, for instance, cross each other's paths? When there are coast guards who are supposed to enforce respective national laws in disputed areas, laws against fishing or whatnot, illegal fishing and so on. Those have to be also clarified, because if they are not, then we keep having incidents. We don't know, there are no rules, and this will be the triggers of conflict later on if they are not managed properly. Well, there are, I think most countries in ASEAN, for instance, but including Japan, South Korea, would like to see a continued U.S. military presence, and but personally, I would prefer a serious diplomatic engagement by the U.S. on the South China Sea issue. Freedom of navigation operations, they do it everywhere in all parts of the world, and what it really signifies, it's not support. I don't see it necessarily as support for, the right, the correct position of the Philippines or whatnot. It's just an assertion that U.S. contests interpretations from China. In fact, U.S. conducts freedom of navigation operations against the Philippines, where it sees that we also have unreasonable maritime claims. So I don't see freedom of navigation operations as by far sufficient or even all that meaningful, except as a show of force, maybe show of power and engagement. Maybe it assures some allies, but I don't see it as a solution, and I don't think the U.S. sees that as a solution either. So we need more from powers. I think the Philippines should be very grateful to Japan for the capability building, especially since Japan's support has been for law enforcement, civilian agencies, maritime agencies, and that is what we need, because we're not preparing for war, we're not preparing for conflict, we're preparing to enforce our legal entitlements as granted by international law, and that is where Japan has been concentrating its support thus far. So that's, I think, more constructive than FONOPS in a way. Of course, U.S. also has been giving some support, but I think far from commensurate with the maritime security requirements of the Philippines. And really, I'm very disappointed at the scale of U.S. support relative to the long-standing alliance, and all that. So yeah, what I think the disputes in the South China Sea and is really a multi-dimensional issue. There's the legal dimension, there's the military or the security dimension, certainly, but it requires diplomacy ultimately to resolve. So if U.S., Japan, or other countries are serious about wanting to preserve peace and stability while at the same time upholding international law and helping the littoral states exercise their legal entitlements, then we need a more comprehensive approach, also multidimensional, where the role of international law, it can be the basis, the principles for a diplomatic settlement of this issue, and that the role of the military will be to prevent further conflicts from occurring, rather than, I mean, there's already an arms race, a mini arms race going on in response to, China's aggressiveness here. And we don't see that as, I don't see it as necessarily a positive direction. We do need to build our capabilities for maritime security, but we don't want excessive, military activities in disputed waters, in waters that connect ASEAN countries with each other as well as with China. These are critical trade sea lanes. So I think there should be a more comprehensive, a more coherent, and multilateral approach to this whole problem. No, there's a declaration of conduct. The code of conduct was a proposal made in the 90s, late 90s. So between ASEAN and China. So there were negotiations which resulted in a declaration of conduct in 2002. The declaration is basically a political statement that, we don't want to exacerbate tensions. We will all exercise self-restraint and not try to complicate the matters. Now, those are, in a sense, motherhood principles. Yeah.
China violated.
Everyone violated,
Everyone.
basically. Yeah. I mean, if you look at it,
Everyone.
that may be a subjective statement.
Yeah.
China will say Philippines violated, Vietnam violated, but each country, because it wasn't explicit or specific enough or operational enough. I mean, it's easy to accuse each other of violating principles. Right? So the code of conduct is intended to be more specific, operational, hopefully more binding. Now, the term legally binding has been used, but this is also very questionable because in the international community, when you say legally binding, you will need to talk about sanctions for violations of the agreement. You will need to talk about who monitors, who says, who adjudicates, yeah? And there is no such system that could work, say, between China and ASEAN, given the power asymmetry and all that. So so I'm very doubtful that there can be a legally binding document, but I would hope that there will be at least more concrete measures for conflict avoidance, for crisis management, and some mechanisms among the countries themselves to monitor enforcement of the agreement. That's an interesting question. I wouldn't count on it happening anytime soon. If China goes in that direction, I'm pretty sure it will be the outcome of a process where China seeks assurances, especially security assurances from the bigger players in the region. I mean, why does China has its own legitimate security concerns, perhaps, no? It's behaved very badly, no? But at least from its perspective, the reason is because it also feels threatened by other countries, no? So if China were to make such a major compromise as what you suggest, no? Abandoning those features, opening up those features for common use, or demilitarizing the uses or functions of those features, then it will require similarly bold compromises by the other players. Hypothetically, since we're just drawing up scenarios here, hypothetically that may include, the compromise that China will want to extract may include no military activities, yeah, in the disputed areas in the South China Sea, no freedom of navigation operations by the United States or other countries similarly giving up their main islands, and features, or demilitarization for everyone in all of the features. So, and that's not going to be a simple trade, a simple exchange, because while China, it's possible, while China can afford to give up those features because it has a blue water navy already, it has 2 aircraft carriers so far, the Philippines will worry about, should we give up Pag-asa Island? Should we give up Ayungin Shoal? I mean, obviously, if we do, then China will, overnight try to occupy this, or somebody else will, even if not China. So the level of strategic mistrust will certainly get in the way, and concerns about the power asymmetry. It's easier for China to make compromises than for the smaller countries who who really feel that, you know, when they occupy those features, they're not projecting power. You know, they're defending uh, their security perimeters. Huh? I mean, so those are really potential problems. But like you, I mean, I agree. We have to think the unthinkable, yeah, and be ready for all sorts of contingencies, or even create such opportunities, such possibilities.